My name is Nora Vance. I'm 36, and I found out exactly what my father thought I was worth from a recovery room, while I was still too sedated to open my eyes. I had been on the table for 4 hours. A surgeon had just rebuilt my left shoulder after a car ran a light and folded my sedan into a guardrail. I came up out of the anesthesia the way you come up out of deep water, slow, the sounds arriving before the light, and the first clear sound I heard was my father's voice, low and reasonable, the voice he used when he wanted you to think he was being practical instead of cruel. He was standing 2 feet from my bed, talking to the doctor about the cost of my care, and he said, "If it comes to it, let her go. She's not worth the bill." I didn't move. I kept my eyes shut and my breathing even, the way you do when a part of you understands that the next 30 seconds will divide your life into a before and an after. He thought I was unconscious. He spoke about me the way you'd speak about a car that wasn't worth the repair. And in those 30 seconds, I made a decision that undid 8 years of quiet payments and 30 years of a story he told himself about who built what. I didn't cry. I want you to sit with that, because everyone expects the woman on the gurney to fall apart, and I didn't. By the time they wheeled me to my room, I had already done the math, and the math is the part that broke him. 3 days later, every card my father owned was declined at a gas pump, and the worst part for him hadn't even started, because there was one name on the paperwork that ran his entire life. He had signed it himself, 8 years earlier, in a crisis, without reading it, and it was mine. If you have ever been the steady one, the one a family leans on so hard they forget you're a person and start treating you like a balance they get to draw down, this story is for you. If anyone has ever quietly decided you were a cost instead of a daughter, you already know the temperature of the air in that recovery room. Drop a comment and tell me the moment you realized someone you loved had been keeping a ledger on you. And subscribe, because the next one will find you when you need it. Let me back up, because you deserve to know who I was before that bed, and how a man comes to say a sentence like that about his own child. I grew up in a 2-story house outside Akron that always smelled faintly of wood glue, because my father ran a custom millwork shop and brought the shop home on his clothes, Vance Custom Millwork. He built cabinets, staircases, the kind of work that ends up in other people's beautiful houses. He was good with his hands and good at telling people he was good, and somewhere along the way he confused those two things. We were not poor, but money was the weather in our house. It decided the mood. And from the time I could count, I understood that in my father's mind, money and worth were the same word. He kept a green ledger in the kitchen drawer, and when I was 14, I found it, and I found a column with my name at the top, and under it he had written down what I cost: braces, a field trip, a winter coat. There was no such column for my brother Dale. When I asked my mother about it, she took it out of my hands and said gently, like it explained everything, "Your father just thinks some children are an investment and some are an expense." I have carried that sentence for 22 years. I want you holding it too, because it comes back. So I did what the expense in a family learns to do. I made myself indispensable. I paid my own way through community college, ringing up groceries on the night shift, and then I put myself through the rest of an accounting degree, and I became a forensic accountant. That's a real job, and it's exactly what it sounds like. People hire me to find the money. I read balance sheets the way other people read a face across a dinner table, looking for the small thing that's lying. Numbers don't have a favorite child. They don't soften a loss to spare your feelings. I loved that about them. They were the only part of my world that told the truth without first checking what it would cost me. I was responsible to the point of self-erasure. If you've ever been that person, the one who answers the phone at 2 a.m. and shows up with a casserole and a checkbook, the one everyone calls dependable while quietly meaning useful, you already know what I'm describing. I built my whole identity on being the one who could be counted on, because somewhere along the way I had decided that being needed was the same as being safe. As long as they needed me, they couldn't throw me away. That was the deal I made with myself. I just never noticed that I was the only one who'd signed it. My brother Dale was the investment. 2 years younger, golden from birth. When Dale dropped out of his second college, my father called it finding himself. When Dale wrecked a truck, my father called it boys being boys. Dale was being groomed, everyone understood, to one day run the shop, despite the fact that Dale could not read a P&L statement if you spotted him the decimal point. He had our father's gift for telling people he was good without the inconvenient part where you had to be. And then there was my mother, Diane. I want to be fair to her because she is the saddest figure in this. There were moments over the years when I'd watch her open her mouth as if she were finally going to say the thing, going to stand between me and the worst of it. And every time she'd glance at my father and close her mouth and pour more coffee. She loved me the way you love a difficult weather system. From a distance, with the windows shut. Now here's the part the title promised you, and it's the hinge, so stay with me. 8 years ago, my father's company nearly died. He'd taken on a big contract, mismanaged the cash, and missed payroll twice. The bank was 3 weeks from calling his loan, which would have meant the building sold at auction, 40 employees on the street, and my father's name in the kind of public failure he'd spent his whole life avoiding. He didn't call Dale. Dale was no use in a fire. He called me. He called the expense. I drove down that same night. I sat at the kitchen table where the green ledger used to live, and I opened his books. And what I found was a man who had been confusing revenue with profit for a decade. The company wasn't dying because of one bad contract. It was dying because of how he ran it. But the bones were good. The work was good. The 40 people were good. So I did the only thing that would actually save it. I paid off the back debt that was about to sink him. $264,000, money I had saved $1 at a time being the responsible one. And then I restructured the rest. And I drew up the documents, and I will tell you exactly what they said, because this is the entire spine of the story. The remaining loan was assigned to me personally. The deed to the building was transferred into my name. And the controlling interest in Vance Custom Millwork, 51% was placed in my name, with my father keeping his title, his office, his salary, and full operational control for as long as he wanted it. On paper, I owned the company. In every other way, it stayed his. That was the whole point. I didn't do it to take anything. I did it to save it and to make sure that if he ran it into the ground again, the building and the people couldn't be auctioned out from under him. He signed it in 11 minutes. I watched him. He didn't read a word. He thought it was a tax structure. A clever thing his accountant daughter had set up to protect him from the bank, and in his version of events, he was being generous by letting me handle the paperwork. He shook my hand across the table and said, "Knew you'd be good for something." And then, because he could not help himself, he added, "Don't go telling your brother. He'll think I love you best." We both knew that was a joke. We both knew which way the ledger ran. After that, I sent him $3,000 a month. I framed it as helping with my mother's care and his blood pressure medication and the slow season. The truth is, I sent it because I was still trying to buy a thing that was never for sale. $3,000 a month, every month, for 96 months. If you want the number, and I want you to have the number the way I had to hold it, that is $288,000, on top of the $264,000. On top of his cards, which years earlier I had set to auto-pay from my account, because he kept forgetting and getting hit with fees, and which he never once changed back. For 8 years, I funded the man's entire life and let him believe he was carrying himself. And he stood by my hospital bed and called me a bill not worth paying. If you've ever wired money on faith to someone who would not lift a finger for you, I want you to do one thing tonight. Just one. Pull a single statement, the oldest one you can find, and add up what you've actually sent. Don't decide anything. Just hold the number. Because the next part is where I stopped holding it, and where my father's old business partner walks back into this story carrying a folder I didn't know still existed. Subscribe so you're here when that door opens. It opens hard. So, the recovery room. I lay there with my eyes shut and my reconstructed shoulder throbbing under the morphine, and I listened to my father negotiate my mortality like a man haggling over a quote he found too high. Let her go. She's not worth the bill. The doctor, to his credit, said something firm about how that was not a decision in front of us. And my father said, "I'm just being realistic. The girl's a money pit. Always has been." And there it was, 22 years later, the same column with my name on top. Some children are an investment. Some are an expense. I didn't open my eyes. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't rage, not the loud kind. It was a strange, flat clarity, the same feeling I get when I'm 3 hours into a forensic audit, and the discrepancy finally surfaces, and I see the whole fraud laid out clean. I felt the room go quiet and orderly in my mind. I had been treating this man as a problem to be loved into fairness. He was not a love problem. He was a structure problem. And when a structure is failing, you do not stand underneath it shouting. You find the load-bearing element and you decide whether to hold it or let it go. I let it go. I want to tell you what I did, but first I want to tell you what I did not do. Because the not doing is the whole philosophy, and it's the thing the people in my comments are always begging the women in these stories to learn. I did not confront him. I did not wait for him to come to the side of the bed so I could open my eyes and watch his face. I did not call my mother crying. I did not give him my noise. A man like my father feeds on noise. Noise is proof that he still has the power to move you, and as long as you're moving, he's winning. I would not give him noise. I would give him paper. The next morning, one-armed in a hospital bed, I opened my banking app on my phone and I canceled the $3,000 transfer that was scheduled for the 1st. Then I went into the account that auto-paid his 2 credit cards and his truck insurance and his phone, and I turned every one of them off. It took, I think, about 4 minutes. 4 minutes to undo 8 years. I felt no triumph and no grief, just that flat, clean clarity, like balancing a column that has refused to balance for a very long time. And then I called Walt. Walt Hendricks was my father's first partner, the man who'd been at the shop the day it opened 30 years ago and who'd been quietly pushed out a decade in, when my father decided he didn't like sharing credit. Walt was 71 now and kept bees and held no love for my father, but he had loved that company, and he had loved me a little, in the gruff way of men who notice the kid nobody else is feeding. When I'd done the restructuring 8 years back, it was Walt who'd helped me dig up the original incorporation documents from a box in his garage, because my father's record-keeping was a crime scene. Walt knew, better than anyone alive, who had actually built and who had actually saved that company. I called him from the hospital and I told him what my father said. There was a long silence on the line, and then Walt said, in a voice like a closing drawer, "Well, I always wondered what it'd take for you to stop paying for the privilege of being his daughter." And then he said the thing that turned a quiet decision into a plan. "You know he's throwing himself a party. 30th anniversary of the shop. Big to do at the new showroom 3 weeks out. Bank's coming, the man from the chamber, that reporter who does the local business page. He's going to stand up in front of all of them and announce that Dale's taking over as owner." A pause. Owner of what exactly? I lay very still in that bed, and for the first time in days I smiled. Now here is where I have to warn you about something, because I know what you're hoping for, and I need you braced. You are hoping that somewhere in the next 3 weeks my father has a moment, that he visits the hospital again, sees me small and broken in that bed, and something cracks open in him and he becomes, even for an afternoon, the father a daughter deserves. I hoped it too. I'm telling you now so it doesn't ambush you the way it ambushed me. The apology never comes. What comes instead is worse, and it's the reason I stopped trying to be loved into fairness and started letting the paper speak. The first thing that happened, 3 days after I shut it all off, was the cards. My father drove to a gas station on a Tuesday and his card was declined, and then his second card, and then he stood there in front of the pump in front of God and the cashier, and a line of people, an important man suddenly unable to buy fuel for his truck. He called me, furious. Not worried. Furious. "There's something wrong with my accounts," he barked, as though I were the help. "Fix it." I was lying in bed with my arm strapped across my chest. I said very calmly, "There's nothing wrong with your accounts, Dad. There's something wrong with mine. I've been paying yours for 8 years and I'm not anymore." Silence. I could hear the slot machine sound of his brain trying to reconcile a balance that suddenly wouldn't balance. And then, instead of an apology, instead of even a question about my shoulder, he said the thing that told me exactly who he was. He said, "You can't do that to me, after everything I've done for you." After everything he'd done for me. I almost laughed. I didn't. I said, "I heard you, Dad, in the recovery room." I was awake. And I hung up, and I turned my phone face down on the blanket, and I listened to my own heartbeat, steady, like a column finally adding up. Then came the manipulations, and I want to walk you through them, because if you've lived this, you'll recognize every single move, and there's a strange relief in seeing them named. First came the warmth. My mother called. Syrupy. As if no party and no recovery room and no 8 years had happened, just to check on her girl, and to mention, "Oh, Oh, by the way, that things were a little tight at the house this month, and wasn't it lucky I was so good with money? I told her I loved her and that I was healing well and that I would not be sending anything. She got quiet. Then she got cold. The warmth, when it doesn't work, always turns to cold. That's how you know it was never warmth. Then came the guilt, delivered by my father through Dale, because my father had learned never to ask for anything himself when he could send the golden child to do it. Dale showed up at my apartment with a gas station bouquet, sat on my couch, and explained to me, a forensic accountant who had just personally rescued the company he was about to inherit, how the family worked. "You're the strong one," he said, "the way you'd hand someone a sentence you'd decided they'd never make you carry. Dad's getting old. He says things. You can't take it so personal. Just turn the money back on and come to the party and we'll all move past it." I asked Dale if he knew what our father said while I was unconscious. Dale shrugged. "He didn't mean it like that. That's the whole religion of the golden child, right there. He didn't mean it like that. As though meaning were a thing that lived somewhere other than in what a person does when he thinks you can't hear him." Then came the third party. An aunt I barely spoke to. Then a cousin. Then finally an invitation to a family dinner to clear the air, staged at my parents' house, where I would be expected to sit at the table and accept a performance of reconciliation in exchange for turning the faucet back on. My father wanted an audience for my surrender. He'd always understood instinctively that the cruelty lands harder with witnesses, and so does the apology you extract. So I decided to give him the audience. Just not the surrender. I didn't go to the dinner. I sent a card. It said, "I'll see you at the anniversary. Congratulations on 30 years. That's all. He read it, I'm told, as a victory. He thought I'd folded, that I was coming to the party to make peace and quietly resume my role as the family's checkbook. He told Walt I'd come to my senses. He had Dale's name engraved on a little brass plaque for the ownership announcement. He ordered a cake. I want to pause here and tell you what I was actually doing during those 3 weeks, because this is the part the title promised, and it's the part that matters, the part that is competence and not luck. I want it to be earned. I called my attorney, Ruth Calloway, a woman in her 60s who has the gentlest voice and the hardest spine of anyone I've ever met, and we pulled every document from the 8-year-old restructuring. The deed to the building, in my name, the assigned note, the cap table showing 51% of Vance custom millwork held by me. All of it clean, all of it signed by my father's own hand in those 11 unread minutes. Ruth reviewed it and looked up at me over her glasses and said, "Nora, you don't have a case. You have keys. You've owned this company for 8 years. He's been a very well-paid employee who doesn't know it." Then she paused and said the line I keep on a card in my wallet now. "The kindest thing you can do for a man like this is let the truth arrive while everyone's still seated. If you keep your own receipts, if you're the kind of person who files the paperwork even when no one believes you'll ever need it, you can already feel where this is going. I want you to subscribe so you're here when it lands, because what happened at that party is the reason I can sit here and tell you this calmly today. It landed exactly as quietly as I'd planned, and it was the loudest thing that ever happened to my father. The showroom was beautiful. I'll give him that. 40-foot ceilings, the good track lighting, every cabinet and staircase he'd ever been proud of arranged like sculpture. There were maybe 90 people. The man from the bank in a navy blazer, the woman from the Chamber of Commerce, the reporter with her little recorder, the 40 employees, the real ones, the ones whose hands had actually built every stick of it, standing along the back wall in their good shirts. My mother in pearls, Dale up front, already glowing like a man being handed something he hadn't earned, which is the only way Dale had ever received anything. I came in late, on purpose, with my arm still in its sling, and I stood at the back near the employees, and I watched my father work the room. He was magnificent at it. He always had been. He told the story he'd told for 30 years, the self-made man, the empire built by his own 2 hands, and he never once mentioned the night it almost died, or the daughter who drove down to save it. When he saw me at the back, he gave me a small nod, the nod of a man who believes the prodigal has returned to the fold and the money is about to flow again. I nodded back. Let the truth arrive while everyone's still seated. He tapped his glass. The room hushed. He made his speech. He talked about legacy. He talked about blood and continuity and keeping it in the family. And then he called Dale up, and he held up the little brass plaque, and he said, "It's my great honor tonight to announce that the future of Vance Custom Millwork belongs to my son. I'm transferring ownership of this company to Dale, effective today." And he looked just for a second toward the back of the room, toward me, to make sure I saw what I'd lost by being difficult. To make sure I felt the cost. I did not stand up and make a speech. I want you to understand that, because everyone always pictures the big speech, the trembling finger, the screaming. I have never raised my voice to my father in my life, and I didn't start that night. I walked slowly up the center aisle, my arm in its sling, and I stopped beside Dale and that brass plaque, and I set a single manila folder down on the table next to the cake. And I said, just loud enough for the front rows and the bank and the reporter to hear, "Dad, you can't transfer what you don't own." He laughed. It was a terrible laugh, the laugh of a man who has not yet understood that the floor is no longer there. "Everyone, ignore my daughter, she's emotional, she's on pain medication." "Open the folder," I said. He didn't. So Ruth, who had come as my guest and was standing quietly to the side in her good gray suit, opened it for him and laid the documents out on the table one by one, the way you deal cards to a man who has already lost the hand and doesn't know it. The deed, the note, the cap table, 51%. His signature, 8 years old on every page. The man from the bank leaned in. He knew exactly what he was looking at. I watched his face change. The reporter's little recorder was still running. "You came to me 8 years ago," I said, and I kept my voice level, almost gentle, because gentle is the cruelest temperature you can use on a man who only respects volume. "The bank was 3 weeks from auctioning this building with all 40 of these people inside it. You didn't call Dale. You called the expense. I paid $264,000 to clear your debt, and I restructured the company so it could never be taken from these people again. And you signed it in 11 minutes without reading it. You've owned nothing for 8 years, Dad. You've been an employee, a very well-paid one. I paid your cards. I paid your truck. I sent you $3,000 a month for 96 months. $288,000 on top of the rest, while you told everyone you carried yourself." The room had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that has a temperature. My father's mouth was working, but nothing useful was coming out of it. And so I said the last thing, and I said it as quietly as I'd heard him say his version, 3 weeks earlier, to a surgeon, while he thought I was too far under to hear. 3 weeks ago, you stood next to my hospital bed and told my surgeon to let me go because I wasn't worth the bill. I let that sit in the air in front of all 90 of them. You were wrong about one thing. I was always the one paying the bill. Yours. I picked up the brass plaque with Dale's name on it, and I set it gently in my father's hands, because I had no use for it, and I said, "It's handled." Now here is where I have to keep my promise to you, the one I made earlier. I told you the apology never comes, and I need you braced, because what happened next is the part people always hope will be the moment he breaks open and becomes human. It isn't. It never is. My father did not look at me. He looked around the room, at the bank, at the reporter, at the 40 faces along the wall, and he did the only thing a man like that knows how to do when the noise has been taken from him. He turned on the nearest person and tried to make it her fault. He turned on my mother. "Did you know about this?" He barked at her in front of everyone, as though her knowing or not were the crime. And my mother, who had spent 30 years pouring coffee instead of speaking, finally opened her mouth, and what came out was not for me. It was for herself. "I knew you'd do this to us someday, Gerald," she said, her voice shaking. "I just always thought it'd be to me." And she walked out. Not toward me, past me. The weather moving on. Dale stood there holding nothing, his glow gone gray, and for one moment I saw something almost like a real person flicker behind his face. Some dim understanding that he had spent his whole life being handed a company that was never going to be his because it had never been his father's to give. He said quietly, "Nobody told me." And that, I think, is the truest thing my brother has ever said. The family turned on itself right there in the showroom, in front of the bank and the chamber, and a woman with a recorder. My father shouting at my mother's back, Dale shouting at my father, and Aunt loudly telling a cousin she'd always known something was off with that company. I didn't shout. I stood in the middle of it, in the eye of it, with my arm in its sling, and I felt the thing I'd been waiting 8 years to feel and didn't recognize at first, because I'd never felt it in that house before. It was quiet. Not peace exactly, just quiet. The structure had finished failing, and I was the only one still standing, because I was the only one who'd ever known where the weight actually rested. Let me tell you how it settled, because you've earned the whole accounting, every thread, and because the end is where this stops being about revenge and starts being about something better. The company is mine, and it is fine. Better than fine. The first thing I did, the very next Monday, was drive to the showroom and stand in front of those 40 employees and tell them the truth. That ownership had not changed, only the name on a piece of paper they'd never seen, and that not one of their jobs was going anywhere. Then I promoted the shop foreman, a woman named Renata who had been running the floor in everything but title for 11 years while Dale got the credit, and I made her the general manager. The work is good. The work was always good. It was only ever the man at the top who couldn't read the books. I did not throw my parents out of their house. I want you to know that, because the easy ending, the cheap one, would have been to take everything. The house is in my father's name, not mine, and I left it there, even though I could have leaned. But I stopped the $3,000 a month, and I will not turn it back on, and so my father, for the first time in 8 years, has to live inside the actual size of his own life. That, it turns out, is the harshest sentence available to a man like him. Not poverty. Honesty. I kept Dale on at the shop, in a real job, an honest one, working under Renata, learning the trade with his hands the way our father pretended he had. He's not good at it yet. But he shows up, and last month he sent me a text that just said, "The dovetail joint finally held. Thought you'd want to know." I haven't answered it yet, but I haven't deleted it either. Some things you keep on the table without deciding. My mother and father are still in the house, still married, still keeping the windows shut against each other. She never did come to me. The almost apology, the moment she stood between me and the worst of it, came 30 years too late, and was, in the end, about herself. I sent her a card on her birthday. I do not send money. If you've ever had to learn the difference between abandoning someone and simply stopping the bleeding, you know it isn't cruelty. It's just the first honest thing you do after a lifetime of paying for the privilege of being unloved. And there's one more thing I kept. When I left the hospital, a nurse handed me the little plastic bracelet they'd cut off my wrist, the one with my name and my date of birth, and the surgery date printed on it. I almost threw it in the bin by the elevator. Instead, I brought it home, and it sits in the top drawer of my desk next to the folder. I don't keep it as a wound. I keep it as a fact. It's the receipt for the night I finally added myself into the column. So here's what I've come to understand, and it's the only lesson I'll hand you, because I think you came here for it. The people who praise you for being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who can always be counted on, are very often just naming the person they have quietly decided they will never have to carry. My father spent 30 years keeping a ledger on whether I was worth the cost, and he never once noticed that the name on the bottom of every page he'd ever signed, the deed, the note, the company, his entire life, had only ever belonged to me. He told a surgeon I wasn't worth the bill. He was right that there was a bill. He was just wrong about who'd been paying it the whole time, in silence, hoping it would one day be enough to be loved. It was never going to be enough. That's the thing I'd give you if I could reach through and give you one thing tonight. You cannot buy your way into a heart that has already decided you're an expense. You can only stop spending. So if this reminded you of someone, if there's an account somewhere with your name carrying weight that was never yours to carry, look at it this week. Don't decide anything tonight. Just look. And then handle it, in your own time, in your own quiet way, with paper instead of noise. Share this with someone who's been the strong one for too long and needs to hear that putting the weight down isn't betrayal. It's just balancing the books. Drop a comment and tell me the sentence you've been carrying, the one with your name on top of the column, because I read them and you are not the only one holding it. Hit subscribe so the next story finds you when you need it. I'll see you in the next one.